What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Welcome back to the 80s Project, and we are getting awful close to the ending of 1984 here. In fact, after this episode, there's only one left to go in this somewhat uneven year of horror. But let's just see if the tail end of things shakes things out. Let's start this block off with a film that did have a small limited run back in August, but had its regular release on November 16th, and it's Night of the Comet. It begins with the news that a comet is passing by Earth, one that hadn't been here in 65 million years, when the dinosaurs died out. People are celebrating being able to see it, and there's a little movie theater where the last starfighter's girlfriend works, and she's obsessed with video games. Her boss is Uncle Harvey, and her sister is a very early role for Kelly Maroney. But then, the comet arrives, lighting up the sky while everyone looks up at it, although Regina stays in the projection booth, fooling around with a guy. The next morning, the streets are empty and everyone is gone, a bunch of clothing littering the ground with red piles of dust everywhere. Reg and her guy are fine though, but he goes outside and is very quickly killed by a zombie-like man. Reg has to fight him and then heads out into the red haze, and man, do I wish getting around in LA was this easy now. And she goes home. There, she finds that her sister Samantha is also still alive, and when they hear a DJ transmitting live, they try to go find him. He's Raoul, not being eaten here, at least not yet, and they get a phone call saying that they can come to an underground installation where a bunch of survivors are. They're a group of scientists, including Mary Bland, and now we just need Paul Bartel for the complete set. And Geoffrey Lewis is here, and I'd call him another name, but this is the film I most relate him to, and I don't know his name here. The girls get guns, and here's a fun tidbit. In the movie, Sam complains when the gun jams.
See, this is the problem with these things. Daddy would have gotten us Uzis.
But it wasn't supposed to. The gun actually jammed, and she improvised the line. After some shenanigans, the trouble really kicks in when the people from the facility take them in, but it appears as if they're slowly succumbing to the comet's effects due to an air contamination. So it's up to our trio to escape, and also save a couple of kids that are there. So this one was pretty low budget and was written and directed by Tom Eberhardt, the director of Soul Survivor from earlier in the year. He actually came up with the concept for this one while working on PBS documentaries and asked teenage girls how they would handle the apocalypse and used their answers to develop this script. He got $700K to make it, and the producers initially didn't want Eberhardt to direct and even tried to get him fired early on in filming. With the budget that low, you may be wondering how they cleared the streets for all those empty LA shots, but they didn't have the money to do that, so they just went really early in the morning and shot in intersections where they could shoot while cars were held up at red lights. Also, there's a scene where they're shopping to Girls Just Want to Have Fun, and you may notice that it doesn't quite sound right. And that's because they couldn't afford the actual version, so they just paid for the licensing and then had other artists record a version to save the money. It got some solid reviews and turned out to be a nice success, earning around $14 million in its run, making it very profitable. But then, over time, its legacy just grew and the cult status increased, and it's stated that it was a major influence on the creation of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and having Valley girls facing end-of-the-world scenarios. There was never a sequel, although it's been in line for a remake for a while now. Attempts began back in 2018, although there hasn't been any movement on that for quite a bit, so it appears to be dead. And this is a really fun film. I'll give it a 3.5. The story's a bit unfocused, and it's like more of a series of short adventures as opposed to a feature film, but the characters are awesome, and it does a phenomenal job of creating a mood with so little money. The horror cultural significance is a 3 since it was a hit and has a good amount of cult notoriety, but it's never quite hit the mainstream and didn't have a lot of impact on the genre at the time, even if it eventually had some influence. But it's known enough and has a fair amount of recognizable people in it to get the 3. Should you watch it? Yeah, but maybe do it in a steel-lined room, just in case. This next one probably should have been back with the April films since it debuted in Australia on April 19th, but it arrived in the US on November 16th, and it's Razorback. We're in the outback, and we see old Jake here attacked by something as it crashes through his house and eats his grandson. No one believes his story that it was a giant razorback boar, but they didn't have enough evidence to say that he did it, so they let him free. 2 years later, in America, reporter Beth is headed to Australia for a story, and side note, Judy Morris was in a number of things, mostly Australian TV. But she's also a writer and wrote Babe, Pig in the City, and Happy Feet, which she co-directed. When she gets there, the locals aren't very welcoming, and that night, a bunch of punks run off the road and attempt to assault her, but that giant boar shows up and then chases them away, but then eats her. Jake is here too, and he recognizes the handiwork of his old nemesis, and meanwhile, Beth's husband, Gonzo, comes looking for her. After watching her footage, he finds Jake, but then runs with those punks, but they leave him out in the desert. While out there, he starts to hallucinate, and there's a number of incredible visuals and cool imagery. He ends up at the house of Sarah, one of the only people that believes Jake's story about the Razorback, and the three of them team up to try to bring down the big fella, not to mention those jerky punks. So, this little number is from Russell Mulcahy, and this guy was one of the most prominent music video directors of the era. He did so many and was responsible for the video for the Buggles' Video Killed the Radio Star, the first music video to be played on MTV. He did tons of videos for Elton John, Duran Duran, and even the Billy Joel Pressure video. This film was his theatrical feature debut, though, and was definitely a slight nod to Jaws, and was even referred to as Jaws on Trotters, Trotters being hooves. The budget was 5 million Australian dollars, and a full 250K of that went to building the full-sized animatronic version of the killer pig. In fact, 6 different versions of the porker were made for different purposes, some bigger than others. But then, even though the reviews were mostly good, the film was a bomb at the box office and only earned 800K in Australia, and when it was given a limited release here, it only did 150K. However, later it started to build up a fan following, mostly on cable, and soon developed a nice-sized cult following. It also got nominated for a number of Australian Film Awards, winning 2. And this is good stuff. It's another 3.5. It's cool and moody and a solid adventure, even if the script is a touch all over the place, and I did want to see more of the boar. The significance is a 2.5 since it got some cult recognition, but it's just not enough, and even though it's one that's become a little bit more known, it's just not a widely seen film at all. Should you watch it? Yup, while eating bacon. Well, on that very same day in the US again, we're checking out a very different kind of story, and then we're going to take a look at special effects. It opens with Ms. 45 doing a nude photo shoot, but a guy walks in and starts a fight, and then chases her. Seems she's his wife, but she runs from him, but he grabs her and shoves her into his car. They actually have a child, and he tries to convince her to come home, but she manages to run away. She then flees to a house of a director who's been trying to lure her in recently, even though he's just been involved in some scandals. He turns out to be someone who will likely give Steven Seagal a hard time, and they go to bed together, but it turns out that he's filming the whole thing. She catches on though and teases him about it, so he strangles her to death, all on camera. He dumps the body and the police go to talk to Keith, and he's the primary suspect, but he mentions that she was going to see Neville. But they don't believe him and arrest him for the murder while the director shoots it all. But then things take a turn when Neville comes to visit Keith and gets him an attorney and says he wants to turn his events into a film and have him play a role in it. He reluctantly agrees, and they begin the casting process to find an actress to play Andrea, even roping in the investigating officer to serve as an advisor. Keith meets a woman named Elaine, who just so happens to look exactly like his wife, and she gets cast in the film. But when Keith starts to blur fantasy and reality, he seems to be playing right into Neville's hands. But what is his whole deal anyway? And this is both written and directed by the great Larry Cohen. And we've seen him on the project already with both Q the Winged Serpent and Full Moon High, but he's done so many cool flicks. This was an old script that Cohen had written back in 1967 and was greatly influenced by Hitchcock, and has sometimes been regarded as Cohen's strangest work. One interesting thing is that Zoe Lund plays the double role of Andrea and Elaine, and she had a very well-known and discussed heroin addiction, which later turned to cocaine, and those habits caused massive heart damage that ultimately killed her at the age of 37. Meanwhile, Cohen stated that even though her habits caused some issues on other sets, he had no issues with her and said the shoot was very smooth. The original title was The Cutting Room, and even though there's no official numbers, he says that it was one of the lowest budgets that he had to work with. I guess it couldn't find a regular distributor, and it released straight to video, where it would become one of his lesser known entries. And this is another 3.5. I wasn't really expecting a De Palma-style Hitchcock Vertigo trip from Cohen, but it's certainly not disappointing. It suffers a bit from having a lack of someone to root for, since the characters are all mostly jerks, but it is a nice little thriller. The HCS is just a 1.5 though, and even though Cohen's a name, this is one of his more obscure entries and isn't much seen. Should you watch it? Yep, these special effects are special enough for a look. So here's a curiosity, because this next one did run in the UK on July 13th and in Australia on September 13th, but it premiered in the US on November 16th, and it's Perfect Strangers. But I guess it was also called Blind Alley, and I'll talk about it in a bit why that's weird later. It's set in New York City, and this man is stabbed in an alleyway, but it's witnessed by a little kid. The criminal is concerned that the little one might be able to identify him, and he's a mob member, so his boss tells him to find the brat and take it out. His mom is Anne Carlisle, who we saw back in '82 in Liquid Sky, and her sister is one half of Bongwater. And if Johnny looks familiar, well, it's because he's Brad Rinn, who we literally just saw in the last movie as Keith. He meets Sally and they flirt, and his plan is to get it good with her and make the little child's death look like an accident. Turns out that little Matthew's dad shows up and they're having custody issues, and Sally and Johnny start to date. And I love that the little dude remembers that Johnny's the killer, and when he says that he's a cable guy, Matthew shakes his head no.
Yeah, you know those people that want paid TV, cable TV, but they don't have to pay for it? I hook up paid cable TV, you know, like the pirate TV cable guys.
The officer in charge of investigating the murder is Cameron Vale, and the film really lets us know that he's meant to be a gay character, and he's very much an 80s version of a gay character. Meanwhile, Hubby hires a PI who was also in Liquid Sky, and Johnny tries to convince the little bugger not to rat on him in the wildest way possible, by reminding him of the scene in E.T. where he went white and almost died.
Remember? He got all sick and he turned white and he almost died, didn't he? You know why? You know why he almost died? Because people found out the secret, that's why.
Turns out that he kinda likes the kid though, and puts off killing him, and even starts to see himself as a part of their little family. But for how long? Because let me tell you, that kid's a squealer. And here's why this is weird. This one is also written and directed by Larry Cohen. And the funny thing is that I can't find anything that really cites why he had two movies released on the same day. Although, to be fair, they don't appear to have been given a theatrical release, and both just went straight to video. And a number of the same actors from special effects make return appearances here. Although there's one actor that appears for a hot second, and it's Bill Fagerbakke. And you may know him as Tom Cullen from The Stand, but he's also a huge deal in voice acting. And this man is Patrick Starr. Looks like the budget was $4 million, and there's no real information on this one out there, but you may notice my description doesn't sound like horror and is more of a crime thriller, and it really is. But they marketed this one hard as a sort of erotic slasher, and the poster relied heavily on the image of a woman brandishing a big knife. And this is a 3. It's pretty good, and it has a nice vibe going on, but the pacing is just so sluggish. But there's enough great moments to make it a worthwhile watch. The HCS is just a 1.5 though, because it's not well known and didn't make an impact at all, and only gets the 0.5 for being a part of Cohen's roster. Should you watch it? Don't be ridiculous. Of course you should.
Matthew, you're my favorite customer.
Oh, hi, doggy. Our next entry had a debut a few days later in Kentucky on November 19th. And now is our chance to take a look at what waits below. We're told a massive underground cavern called Goliath exists, and are left to wonder what other wonders await beneath the surface. We then have Jesus appears, and this guy was just on the project earlier this year with the TV Frankenstein. But he's an adventurer here, and he's hired to find this massive cave. However, there's a group of scientists there running a number of tests and looking for artifacts, and they need to ask them to leave. A future vessel for a Prince of Darkness is here, so we have a past Jesus and a future Antichrist right in the same movie. But hey, that's my bush! And they find an entrance down into the caverns. There are these big wide expanses, and they determine that they've been untouched for millions of years. But when the military wants to forcefully oust the science guys, Wolf defends them and gets kicked out as well. But then, down in the cave, it appears as if there's something alive, and the soldiers are attacked, and their transmitter is stolen, so they hire him back. So the crew goes down into the earth, finding skeletons and eventually one of those dead men. And yep, there's some sort of man-eating monster down there, chomping on people as it comes out of the walls. But it's not the only thing down there, as there's these dudes with white hair as well. But are they friends or foes? And this one is by Don Sharp, and he's an old school director, going back to 1955. And he made some genre stuff in the 60s with The Kiss of the Vampire and Curse of the Fly. It would end up being his final theatrical feature, as the things he did after this one would be TV movies. They filmed it in actual caverns, and even though the film is set overseas, they shot in both Alabama and Tennessee, and it seems like they had some trouble on the set. There was tampering with the equipment, and Sharp and a number of crew had to be sent to the hospital for carbon monoxide poisoning. No one's quite sure if the tampering was accidental or if a disgruntled local was responsible. When they were done shooting, Sharp was so disappointed with the footage that he gave up on it, and the producers paid him out and brought someone else on to finish the post-production. It only had a limited release and played in a small number of markets before dropping on video, but there doesn't appear to be any box office info available. And it's fine, I'll go 2.5 on it. It keeps your attention, but kind of just barely, although I did enjoy all that nice cave atmosphere. The HCS is just a 1 since it's not spoken of, and you might recognize some of the people involved, but it's not like their name value or anything. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not too rough a watch, but it's definitely nothing special. Let's go to one that doesn't have a specified release date, the only one on this block like that, and it's one that we know was released in Canada at some point in '84, and it's The Slavers. It begins with a woman escaping out of a basement and is chased down by dogs. A bunch of guys retrieve her, but then shoot her dead, and then we're then introduced to Sharon, and she encounters a guy and gets into his car, and very quickly she realizes that he has ill intentions as they forcefully take her to a house. There she's dragged down into the cellar and tossed onto an old mattress. But her disappearance doesn't go unnoticed, and an ad is placed in the paper with a reward for any information about where she went. A guy named Jim answers the ad and starts to hunt for her, but is seemingly coming up against a number of dead ends. Meanwhile, Sharon is used by a number of men that come down into the basement, but they also drug her and force her to obey their every order, and the whole thing is prepping her to be sold off into slavery. The whole operation is run by a guy using the name of The Professor, and Jim gets deeper and deeper into things as he tries to locate Sharon, and he presses on even when the people around him start getting bumped off. And this is another one that's billed as a horror film, but a good portion of it feels more like a crime thriller than anything else. And it's by a guy named Larry Kent. He's been in the industry since the 60s and is still around and made a movie in 2015 called She Who Must Burn. If this one looks a bit dated, it's because it was filmed in 1977, but then it was never completed and Kent lost control of the project. Another company had the rights to the finished product and sat on it until 1984, where they redubbed the entire film, altering around 80% of the dialogue, to the point that Kent said that he no longer associated himself with the product. Although it's more crime, there's definitely more horror-oriented stuff like the scarred-up woman at the house and some of the more torture-oriented segments. This one's wild because there's hardly any information about it out there at all, to the point that it seems to be almost completely forgotten. And it's mostly boring, so it's a 2. There's some interesting moments happening, but not nearly enough of them, and the tediousness overcomes them. The HCS is just a 1 because, like I said, this is insanely obscure, and it's spoken of so little, there wasn't much research I could do on it. Should you watch it? You can likely pass. Well, would you look at that? We're into December now, as this year is drawing to a close, and on the 1st, in Spain, there was the premiere of a film that would get a US release in '86 with Monster Dog. It begins with this guy, although we're not quite used to seeing him like this, but hey, it's Vincent Furnier, or Alice freaking Cooper. And this isn't actually his first film, but it's his first lead role. He was a musician here as well, named Vince Raven, and what we're seeing in the beginning is a music video for one of his songs. His record company wants his new video to have some punch, so they're sending him back to his childhood home, along with his film crew and girlfriend, Sandra. If you've ever heard Cooper in an interview, you might be thrown off when he talks.
Jaws. Yeah, I can hardly remember his face. He was already old when I left.
And I'll talk about that a little later. But it seems like things aren't right at the old homestead, and there's some rowdy pups outside, and a roadblock in which they're warned about wild dogs that have attacked some people. Seems there's also something that happened with Vince's dad that he doesn't like to talk about, but those cops are then killed by something in the woods. It's not quite a dog, not really a monster, perhaps some sort of monster dog. When they get there, the caretaker is now missing, and they settle in, finding a book about werewolves. That night, though, Angela has a dream in which Vince is a furry and has killed everyone. And that freaks him out because he says his pops had a disease that was similar to lycanthropy, and he was killed by an angry mob. But first, another musical number. And hey, Alice sounds like Alice here at least. But Then things really pop off when that posse shows up to take out Vince. Unless they're right about him, and he's the monster dog? Okay, so this one is from Spain, and the director is the notorious Claudio Fragasso, although he used the pseudonym of Clyde Anderson here. Seems like this script was hand-picked by Cooper, as he wanted to do something really sleazy and cheap, and claims that he was the biggest part of the entire budget. He wanted to do it because he had just left rehab for alcoholism and wanted to test himself that he could work sober, and was told that the film would only be released in the Philippines. Looks like the shoot was a problem though, mainly because the big puppet that they built for the monster dog broke down in the very first shot they used it in, and they had to do some rewrites to accommodate not having it. Also, as they did with a lot of low-budget Spanish and Italian films, the entire thing was shot with no sound, and all of the audio was dubbed later. None of the voices in the film itself are the voices of the actors on screen, and the only time that you hear actual Alice is the couple of songs, which were original pieces of music written for the film, Rush recorded with only 2 weeks' notice. Now, there's actually some dispute about its release because it's said to have been screened in both Spain and Italy in December of '84, but there's no record of that. It wasn't submitted to Italy's ratings classification at the time, so it's possible it didn't run there. But it mostly just went straight to video in the countries it was released, like the US. And it's a 2.5. If you're expecting Troll 2 level shenanigans from Fragasso, you're not getting it. It's mostly too low-key, and everyone just feels so subdued, especially Cooper, who's not really right for the leading man role. The significance is a 2 since it definitely was on a lot of video store shelves and has Cooper in it with Fragasso directing, but it certainly didn't get much attention and didn't have any real longevity. Should you watch it? Probably not. It's just not as fun as it could be, but at least it's not what the title says it is. This next one feels a little related, and it ran in France on December 5th and played in Italy the following year and in the US in '86, and it's Rats, Nights of Terror. It says that there was a nuclear war in 2015, so we dodged that bullet, and it is now 225 years later, which they have designated as 225 AB, after the bomb. Some of the survivors live underground, but there's also above ground people called the New Primitives. We meet a group of them on motorcycles, checking out the wastelands that used to be the cities, and they find an old storehouse that contains boxes full of food, sugar, and flour. But then, one of the sacks appears to be moving, and that's because it covers a bunch of rats chowing down on a corpse. They find a couple more bodies and also an old computer, but as they settle in for the night, the little vermin all gather round, looking hungry. After a while, as they split up a bit, a pair of them are taken out and eaten alive, but I guess this one has burrowed inside of this lady, but she has no wounds on the exterior of her body, and I'm not sure how that little dude pulled that off. Oh. Gross. Thankfully though, they have flamethrowers, which come in pretty handy with a bunch of rats, but they soon realize that they're trapped there since the little sillies eat through their cycle tires. So then they have to survive the night, but also deal with their own infighting, but let's face it, they don't really have strong odds as long as they're just hanging out willy-nilly by open windows. And I love that some of the shots of rats are basically just like close-ups of little figurines or something. And what's great is that this is a double shot of Fragasso here, since he also wrote the script for this film. However, he only co-directed this one because the rest was handled by his frequent buddy, Bruno Mattei. Now, we've talked about Bruno before, with Hell of the Living Dead, The Other Hell, and Women's Prison Massacre, and he was an Italian king of schlock. For filming, they used the abandoned set from Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America. They were run down by this point and perfectly fit the post-apocalyptic style that they were going for. Even though they're both listed as co-directors, several stars have stated that it was all Matei's film, and that Fragasso would be there and occasionally give some pointers, but wasn't actually directing all that much. It actually got some decent reviews and ended up with a nice cult following, and in Germany was billed as the third part of the Bronx Warrior saga, even though it was completely unconnected. And I'm giving this one a 3. Now this is more of the ridiculous side of Claudio that I was hoping to see in Monster Dog, although it's not quite Troll 2 levels of goofy, but the idea feels kind of fresh, and the rat stuff is wild, and it's overall a good time. And that final shot is sheer art. For the significance, I'm just giving this a 2 though, because it's not well known at all, but since it's got Bruno and Claudio sitting behind the scenes, I had to give it that extra point. Should you watch it? Yeah, give these little cuties a look.
The book was called the Bible, and it said that God created men and animals.
So there you have it. This block was mostly pretty solid. A lot of decent ones in this particular run, but my favorite is pretty much, I think it's going to be Night of the Comet. There's a couple contenders in there that were pretty good, but Night of the Comet is just one that I would rewatch, and it's a lot of fun. Good time. Let me know which is your favorite down below in the comments. I want to hear which of these you like, which of these you've seen, which of these you haven't seen, and what you would now like to see. Tell me all of that in the comments below. Of course, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you enjoy the channel, subscribe to it and hit the bell to get notified when new episodes go up. And check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines and help keep this panel and project going. Yeah, we've only got one more episode left to go in 1984. Only one more. So stick around. Stay tuned right here on the 80s Project.